The United States has never bombed Iran directly. But what if it did, and the man giving the order was Donald J. Trump? Welcome to What If Horizons, the podcast where geopolitical nightmares are just alternate Tuesdays. I'm your host, and today we dive into the flashpoint that could remake the modern world map. What if President Trump, now back in the Oval Office, orders the U.S. military to join the Israel-Iran war? We're not talking about a few drone strikes or empty threats on social media. We're talking full-scale military engagement, air raids, naval battles, ground deployments, all in a region that already looks like a powder keg duct-taped to a nuclear reactor. Now, to set the scene, it's the summer of 2025. President Trump has returned to office on the wings of a furious voter base and an even more furious Twitter clone. Across the ocean, Israel's Operation Rising Lion has obliterated major Iranian nuclear facilities. Tehran's response? A wave of ballistic missiles, drone swarms, and attacks on U.S. outposts in Iraq and Syria. For weeks, America has maintained a defensive posture, deploying aircraft carriers, Patriot missile batteries, and surveillance drones. But the mood in Washington is shifting, and Trump, never one to whisper when he can yell, has made it clear Iran has crossed a red line. Or maybe 5. He cuts short his appearance at the G7 summit. He warns Iran to surrender unconditionally. He redirects the USS Nimitz carrier group toward the Strait of Hormuz. Social media erupts. Pundits scream. And the world wonders, will the U.S. strike back? What we're about to explore isn't just a speculative exercise. It's a geopolitical Jenga tower where every block removed could send the global order crashing. Over the next 9 parts, we'll unpack the cascading consequences of a U.S. military entry into the Iran-Israel conflict through the lens of Trump's impulsive, media-fueled, base-pleasing presidency. Will this be the end of Iran's regime, or the rebirth of America's worst foreign policy instincts? Let's find out. June 2025 isn't just a date, it's a live wire. Israel has turned its long-simmering threats into blazing reality, launching Operation Rising Lion, a full-scale blitz against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Enrichment sites in Natanz, Fordow, and Iraq, vaporized. Missile stockpiles, scorched. Revolutionary Guard command centers, reduced to smoking ruins. Tehran reels, but doesn't stagger. Iran responds with everything short of a nuclear bomb. Ballistic missiles rain down on Israeli air bases. Suicide drones crisscross Iraqi skies, slamming into American outposts in Anbar and Erbil. Cyber attacks slam Israeli infrastructure and American logistics hubs. And yet, Washington hesitates. Not because it's weak, but because its new commander-in-chief is both calculating and chaotic. Donald Trump watches it all unfold, not from the Situation Room, but from his personal dining room-turned-command center in Mar-a-Lago 2.0, a fortified compound equipped with a gold-trimmed war room and an ever-rolling camera feed. His advisors, a mix of die-hard loyalists and high-octane ex-generals, feed him reports wrapped in Fox News graphics. At first, he plays it cool, deploys the USS Nimitz to the Gulf, orders F-35 squadrons into the region, posts a series of all-caps tweets about Iranian terror thugs. But the calculus shifts fast. Trump isn't reacting to facts, he's reacting to feelings. And the feeling in the room is rage. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, takes to national TV and declares that the great Satan's hand is exposed. He calls Trump a clown tyrant, a phrase that immediately trends on Persian Twitter. In Iraq, a barrage of Iranian-backed drone strikes hits a U.S. logistics convoy, killing 7 soldiers. News breaks during Trump's primetime interview with Newsmax, and the host asks the question America's been dreading. Mr. President, is it time to hit back? Trump pauses, smirks. They hit us. They're gonna pay. Believe me. The next morning, he walks out of the White House with his usual swagger, flanked by aides who look like they've slept in their suits. Without waiting for congressional debate, without formal authorization, he steps up to a podium in the Rose Garden and announces, the United States will now lead a decisive operation to neutralize the Iranian threat. This ends now. No flags waving, no crowds cheering, just a stunned press corps trying to decipher if this is policy or performance. The Pentagon, caught mid-breakfast, scrambles. Defense Secretary J.D. Vance, yes, that J.D. Vance, is reportedly blindsided. The National Security Council convenes. Joint Chiefs prepare strike options. F-22s begin scrambling from Al-Dhafra Air Base. Within hours, the U.S. is not just near the war, it's in it. And yet, there's no clear objective. No congressional vote. No UN resolution. Just Trump, his gut instinct, and a global audience that's no longer sure if this is a page from history or the script of a Hollywood thriller with no ending written. But the next question is, what exactly triggered Trump's leap from saber-rattling to missile launching? The path to war wasn't paved with strategy. It was lined with provocations, ego, and a desperate need for control. Let's rewind the tape and examine the flashpoints that lit the fuse. First, the blood. When American troops are killed, especially under a Republican president, the political gravity shifts. That convoy in western Iraq wasn't just a target, it was a message. Iran didn't just hit soldiers. It hit the myth of American invincibility. And Trump, ever sensitive to perceptions of weakness, couldn't let it go unanswered. His campaign slogan may be peace through strength, but strength, to him, has always meant domination. Second, the provocation. A U.S. Navy drone, patrolling the Gulf near Hormuz, is shot down. Trump tweets, "Iran just made a big mistake." Moments later, a U.S. Navy destroyer reports incoming radar locks. It doesn't matter whether missiles actually fly, Trump hears attack and orders the Pentagon to draw up response plans. That very night, satellite imagery detects Iranian missile movements near Bushehr. Trump takes it as proof. Strike plans move to the front burner. Third, the palace intrigue. His inner circle is a chaotic brew of loyalty and volatility. On one side, hawks like Lindsey Graham and Rick Grenell, whispering that now's the time to end Iran's nuclear ambitions once and for all. On the other, isolationists like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene, warning that Trump is betraying America first by dragging the country back into the same sandpit he once promised to escape. The irony? Trump listens to both, until one insults him. Tucker calls the idea of strikes neocon madness. Marjorie tweets that Trump is falling for the deep state trap. That's all it takes. He turns against them, calling them weaklings and frauds, and tweets out a grainy image of a smoking Iranian airbase with the caption, "Boom." And then there's the wild card, Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli prime minister, bloodied politically and militarily, knows his survival hinges on an American lifeline. Through back channels and public speeches, he makes the case. Israel cannot destroy Iran's nuclear program alone. It needs American firepower. He flatters Trump, calls him the most courageous U.S. leader since Reagan, and warns that failure to act now will mean Iranian nukes by Christmas. Trump loves the praise. He hates being told wait. He doesn't trust the Pentagon, loathes the CIA, and barely acknowledges Congress. So when he finally gives the green light for strikes on Iranian missile depots, it's not after deliberation. It's after a Truth Social post. Tonight, American strength returns to the world stage. God bless America, and pray for our warriors. It's all happening. Without clarity, without strategy, without even a clear objective. The Pentagon warns this could provoke an all-out regional war. Trump brushes them off. He's playing a different game. A game of optics, legacy, and dominance. But if the trigger was messy, the political aftermath back home will be even messier. The battlefield may be in Iran, but the real civil war is brewing inside America's own borders. Let's step into the heart of that storm next. The first bombs drop over Bandar Abbas. American stealth bombers, flanked by Israeli drones, strike Iranian missile batteries and radar stations. The images flood the news cycle. Explosions lighting up the night, flames rising from suspected Revolutionary Guard installations. But as Tehran burns, so does Washington. Domestically, the United States descends into chaos, not from foreign retaliation, but from internal implosion. The war may have started overseas, but it ignites a political firestorm at home hotter than any bunker-busting bomb. Inside the MAGA universe, a civil war erupts. Not the kind with guns and flags, yet, but with microphones, lawsuits, and televised betrayals. Marjorie Taylor Greene calls the strikes a betrayal of every American who voted against endless war. Tucker Carlson, once Trump's nightly whisperer, now leads the opposition from his private media empire. He promised peace, Tucker thunders. Now he's bombing for applause. But on the other side, there's Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, beaming. "This is the Trump we need," he says on Fox News. Bold, decisive, fearless. Iran won't forget tonight. In the GOP, knives are out. Trump's base fractures. At MAGA rallies, chants of USA clash with boos aimed at warmongers. Some Trump supporters still back him out of instinct, loyalty, or sheer habit. But others drift away, disillusioned, furious that the man who once called Iraq a horrible mistake is now authoring a sequel. In Congress, it's no better. Republicans are split down the middle. Senators like Josh Hawley and J.D. Vance, once seen as Trump's ideological heirs, refuse to support the intervention. Vance tells CNN, "This is not what America first looks like. This is George W. Bush in a red hat." The Democrats? Paralysis. Half want to limit Trump's power immediately. The other half fear looking weak on Iran. A resolution under the War Powers Act barely makes it to a vote. Senators Kaine and Murphy push for limits. Speaker Jeffries hesitates. Minority Leader McConnell, smelling opportunity, keeps quiet. Meanwhile, in state houses and on college campuses, protests erupt. Not the sleepy kind, the fiery kind. Anti-war rallies spiral into confrontations with pro-Israel demonstrators. Police clash with crowds in Los Angeles, Atlanta, Boston. A group of veterans chains themselves to the White House gates, chanting, "No more blood for politics." Polls paint a damning picture. 60% of Americans oppose the strikes. Among independents, that number climbs to 70. Even 53% of self-identified Trump voters say they didn't vote for this. But Trump doesn't care. He's not leading a nation, he's leading a movement. And to that movement, he says, they don't want to see America win. I do. He uses the chaos as justification. "Look," he says during a rally in Florida, "we hit Iran. Now they're crying on TV. That means we won." But behind the bombast, the machinery of state is buckling. Intelligence agencies report escalating threats to U.S. embassies. The Pentagon warns of retaliation across multiple continents. The Treasury Department scrambles to prepare sanctions relief for oil markets that just spiked to $130 a barrel. And in living rooms across America, the question isn't just why. It's what now? The military-industrial complex cheers. Wall Street holds its breath. The world watches with clenched jaws. But the real question looms over it all. Has the United States just reignited the forever war? This time, with even fewer allies and even higher stakes? Let's move now from domestic turmoil to the deeper cracks this opens in America's foreign policy doctrine. Because when Trump bombs Tehran, he's not just rewriting the playbook, he's tearing it up entirely. For decades, American foreign policy has oscillated between restraint and intervention, between realism and idealism, between strategic patience and preemptive strikes. But when President Trump launches missiles into Iran, he doesn't just choose a side. He detonates the entire debate. Let's begin with the doctrine he once championed, America First. This was never isolationism in the traditional sense. It was selective engagement, a promise to protect U.S. interests without dragging the country into endless foreign entanglements. Trump ran in 2016 on ending wars, not starting new ones. He pulled troops from Syria. He negotiated with the Taliban. He mocked Bush's Iraq war as a disaster. So how did the man who shouted, "No more stupid wars," find himself authorizing the most dangerous one yet? The answer lies in Trump's fundamental principle, strength. For him, it's not about doctrine, it's about dominance. A missile strike is a tweet you can't delete. It makes the world flinch. And in Trump's mind, flinching equals winning. Enter the redux of maximum pressure. Under his first term, Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions. It crushed the Iranian economy, yes, but it also pushed Tehran back into uranium enrichment. Diplomacy died on the vine. And now, with warplanes over Isfahan, maximum pressure goes from economic to explosive. The goal is no longer just containment, it's humiliation. But here's the catch. Humiliation breeds defiance. And defiance, in geopolitics, is contagious. America's NATO allies aren't on board this time. Not publicly, not loudly. France calls for restraint. Germany calls the strikes unilateral and destabilizing. Even Britain, Trump's supposed Atlantic ally, says it wasn't consulted. Only Israel applauds, loudly and perhaps nervously, because they know what's coming next. China and Russia, meanwhile, pounce. Moscow calls an emergency session at the UN Security Council and accuses the U.S. of committing international aggression. Beijing warns of regional chaos and moves warships closer to the Indian Ocean. Iran, of course, calls for holy vengeance, but so do militias in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. The proxies awaken. And just like that, Trump's decision becomes a beacon, not of deterrence, but of instability. Inside the Pentagon, commanders whisper that the Middle East map is now hot. U.S. forces in Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, and the UAE go on high alert. The fear isn't just retaliation, it's escalation. What happens if Hezbollah hits northern Israel? What if Iran lashes out at Saudi oil refineries? What if Houthi rebels strike a U.S. destroyer in the Red Sea? This isn't a two-player chessboard. It's Jenga, and Trump just pulled out the bottom block. Then there's the nuclear question. Iran, cornered and enraged, may accelerate its nuclear program, not to use it, but to shield itself. North Korea did it. Pakistan did it. Why not Tehran? If survival requires a bomb, then war makes the incentive greater, not smaller. That's the paradox. The strike meant to prevent a nuclear Iran may fast-track its arrival. And how does that play globally? To many nations, America's actions confirm a fear they've whispered about for years, that the U.S. can no longer be predicted nor restrained by law, allies, or its own past. That treaties mean little. That diplomacy is theater. That when the president wants a war happens. And to the rest of the world's strongmen, from Erdogan to Modi to Xi, that's a signal. Power is projection. Rules are for the weak. The Trump doctrine, such as it is, becomes clear in its brutal simplicity. Hit first, explain later, apologize never. But what about deterrence? Some argue this kind of muscular display will prevent bigger wars. That it shows America isn't afraid to act. That it sends a message to North Korea, to Russia, to any adversary watching from the wings. Perhaps. Or perhaps it teaches them to arm faster, strike first, or align together. Because in global affairs, strength without consistency breeds chaos, not order. And chaos, once unleashed, doesn't stop where you want it to. It spreads. It infects. It rewrites the rules you thought you could control. Next, we'll track that chaos. Not in theory, but in real-world consequences. From oil markets to international alliances, from economic tremors to diplomatic earthquakes. Because a single American decision, especially one launched from a podium in Mar-a-Lago, can crack the globe like a fault line. The moment those U.S. missiles scream across Iranian skies, global shockwaves begin. Faster than markets can brace, faster than diplomats can draft their official deep concerns. It starts, as always, with oil. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow choke point through which nearly a fifth of the world's petroleum flows, now sits under the shadow of Iranian retaliation. Tehran doesn't need to blockade it outright. A single missile strike on a tanker, a drone attack on a Saudi loading facility, a mine in the water. The message is the same. Global energy is now a hostage. Oil prices spike overnight. $120, $150, maybe more. Speculators feast. Airlines panic. Food supply chains shudder. Inflation, already itching under the skin of the post-pandemic economy, bursts into flame. Wall Street convulses. The Dow sheds 2,000 points in a day. European markets bleed. Asian indices dive. Biden, now watching this war unfold from the sidelines, is forced to address the nation. We call for de-escalation. But it's too late. The machinery has moved. Central banks are trapped. Raise interest rates to combat inflation, and you tank consumer confidence. Leave them low, and watch your currency burn. No easy answers. Only bad choices. But the economic tremors are only the first wave. Diplomatic fractures begin to surface, sharp and irreversible. America's European allies, the same ones Trump alienated in his first term, are now openly critical. Germany's chancellor calls the strike reckless and destabilizing. Macron, seizing the global spotlight, offers to mediate a ceasefire without the United States involved. Even NATO, traditionally cautious, releases a statement reminding members that Article 5 requires consensus, not unilateral adventure. Meanwhile, The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, meet for an emergency summit. For years, they've sought ways to challenge the dollar, the Western order, the G7. Now they have their moment. China condemns the U.S. action, but more than that, it capitalizes. Beijing reaffirms its energy pacts with Iran, offering to buy oil regardless of sanctions. Xi Jinping calls Trump's strike proof that America seeks war, not peace. At the same time, China uses the distraction to test new weapon systems near Taiwan, measuring America's bandwidth. Russia, smelling blood, escalates in Ukraine, launching a brutal new offensive, betting that the U.S. can't fight two geopolitical fires at once. And it might be right. The global chessboard starts shifting. Saudi Arabia, once a quiet partner in Trump's anti-Iran campaign, begins hedging. MBS hosts both U.S. and Chinese diplomats in Riyadh, playing both sides. India, whose oil supply depends on Iranian trade routes, walks a tightrope of neutrality. Turkey, sensing opportunity, increases its own regional muscle in Iraq and Syria. In other words, the war that began between Israel and Iran, escalated by a Trump decision, now sets the entire global order in motion. But it doesn't stop at governments. The proxies awaken. In Baghdad, militias once tamed by ceasefires now fire rockets at the U.S. Embassy. In Beirut, Hezbollah parades missiles through the streets. In Sana'a, the Houthis launch drones not just at Saudi airports, but possibly at U.S. ships in the Red Sea. These are not coordinated responses, they are instinctive reactions. A great power struck. The smaller powers echo. And as always, civilians suffer first. Yemeni children die in drone strikes. Iranian families shelter under missile sirens. Israeli neighborhoods brace for new barrages. American contractors in Kuwait and Qatar sleep with go bags under their bunks. Refugees pour into Turkey, Jordan, and Europe. NGOs buckle under pressure. Aid convoys are stalled or destroyed. And back in the U.S., the war may be over there, but the impact is unmistakably right here. Gas prices climb to $7 a gallon. Flights are delayed or canceled. Inflation hits groceries, rent, everything. Online, social media splits like tectonic plates. One camp cheers Trump's decisive leadership. The other screams that he's dragged the country into a quagmire for ego. Protests swell. Universities erupt. Veterans warn of déjà vu. 2003 vibes return. Only this time, no yellow cake, no Colin Powell, no grand coalition. Just Trump, Twitter, and targets. Meanwhile, the United Nations convenes an emergency session, but as expected, it's all noise. Vetoes fly. Resolutions stall. The Security Council is paralyzed. The General Assembly votes symbolically. The very institution built to prevent global catastrophe is now watching it unfold through glass. And at the center of it all, a single American decision. A strike. A moment. A signature. Next, we hear from someone who's seen this storm gathering long before the first jet took off. An expert on great power conflict. A voice that's warned of this scenario for years. But first, take a breath. Because if you think this was the climax, it's not. It's just the hinge. The door is still opening, and what's on the other side is far darker. Let's bring in a voice that has studied the anatomy of modern war not just from the halls of academia, but from within the echo chambers of Washington's most secret briefings. Here's Dr. Evelyn Harper, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, now a senior fellow at the Atlantic Institute. She's testified before Congress, advised multiple administrations, and her warnings about escalation pathways in the Middle East have often been eerily prescient. Dr. Harper, the danger isn't just that Trump orders a strike. It's what comes after. Once you commit, you've removed the off-ramp. Iran doesn't think in NATO timeframes. Their strategic depth is measured in generations, not quarters. A direct U.S. assault, especially one perceived as partisan, personal, or impulsive, will set off a chain of events no war room can model fully. We're not talking about deterrence. We're talking about entrapment. She doesn't mince words, and neither should we. Let's unpack her core point. Entrapment. In strategic theory, deterrence works when one side projects enough force to prevent the other from acting. But if that force becomes action, real, kinetic, bloody, then you cross from deterrence into commitment. And once committed, every move is made under pressure to avoid looking weak. That's where mistakes pile up. That's where wars spiral. Trump's calculation here may appear, at first glance, simple: show strength, project dominance, and the fight quickly. But as Harper implies, Iran doesn't fight clean. It fights long, through proxies, politics, and patience. Here's the kicker. Once U.S. boots hit the ground or U.S. planes drop ordnance over Tehran, Trump doesn't just own the operation. He owns the aftermath. That means every car bomb in Baghdad, every cyber attack on U.S. infrastructure, every Hezbollah rocket into Haifa will be judged as consequences of his decision. The media won't distinguish. Neither will history. And there's a domestic contradiction brewing under the surface too. Trump built his comeback campaign, and arguably his second presidency, on a renewed America First narrative. End the wars. Bring back industry. Avoid endless entanglements. It played well in Rust Belt towns, among veterans, among exhausted families who've watched 2 decades of foreign interventions lead to little more than folded flags and bloated contractors. But war, this war, undoes that image. MAGA's ideological house begins to creak under the strain. Because here's the fracture no strategist can mend. When your base is built on staying out, how do you sell a war to them? Yes, Trump's charisma might carry him through the early stages. His surrogates on Fox News and Truth Social might repeat talking points about targeted strikes, short campaigns, re-establishing dominance. But soon enough, body bags arrive, gas prices rise, and Tucker Carlson starts asking real questions on air. Remember the experts' warning: there's no off-ramp once the engines roar. And what happens when Iran doesn't play by our script? What if, instead of folding under pressure, it digs in and retaliates over months? Cyber attacks on U.S. hospitals, electric grids, ports. Rocket fire not just from Iran, but from its network stretching from Yemen to Lebanon. A proxy war stretching across the region and bleeding into Europe and Asia through asymmetrical strikes. And remember, the American public's patience is not infinite, especially not in an election cycle. Polls might support the president in the first 48 hours after a strike. The optics of strength play well until reality hits. Voters don't like chaos. Markets don't like uncertainty. And soldiers? Soldiers don't like dying for poorly defined objectives. We're approaching a convergence point, a moment where strategy, politics, emotion, and optics all collide, and it will fall to Trump, and Trump alone, to navigate that chaos. Is he capable? Is he prepared? Is anyone? The expert's clip was short, but its impact lingers. Because if America plunges into this conflict with the belief that strength is the same as strategy, we'll find ourselves walking into a Middle East vortex that looks disturbingly familiar, but with nuclear shadows and a far weaker hand. In the next segment, we step out of theory and into a brutal ledger. What are the risks? What are the rewards? Is there even such a thing as a win anymore, or just a choice between the least catastrophic outcome? Let's weigh the stakes. So now we reach the meat of the gamble, the risks and rewards matrix. Let's lay it out cold, like a Pentagon PowerPoint behind closed doors, minus the bulletproof glass and optimistic bullet points. Risk 1, quagmire. This is the nightmare scenario drawn in blood and budget overruns. The U.S. intervenes, targets Iranian missile facilities, oil infrastructure, command bunkers, only to find itself sucked into an asymmetric war with no clean exit. Iran, instead of folding, doubles down. It activates Hezbollah in the north, Shiite militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, and maybe even militant elements in Bahrain or Afghanistan. Suddenly, U.S. forces are not just operating in the skies above Iran, but fighting a regional firestorm from Baghdad to Beirut. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan taught us this. It's easy to go in. It's brutal to get out. Risk 2, domestic backlash. Don't underestimate this. Trump's base isn't neocon. They aren't Cheney-era war hawks. They're anti-establishment populists, libertarians, blue-collar nationalists. If their president, their guy, launches another Middle East war, the betrayal won't go unnoticed. Expect mass protests, not just from the left, but from the new right. Social media erupts. Militias splinter. Rallies turn angry. The narrative becomes, Trump sold us out. Civil unrest follows. And in an election year, that's a gift to his enemies. Risk 3, economic shock. Oil crosses $200 a barrel. Iran shuts, or even threatens to shut, the Strait of Hormuz. Global shipping routes get hit. Energy markets panic. Inflation spirals. Wall Street bleeds red. Gas prices surge past $8 a gallon in swing states. Grocery shelves thin out. And all it takes is one drone attack on a Saudi refinery, one missile on an Israeli tanker in the Red Sea. Now, what about the other side of the scale? Reward 1. Decisive blow. If the campaign is short, sharp, and surgical. If Iran's nuclear program is significantly degraded, command structures disrupted, proxy lines cut, it might restore U.S. deterrence in a way not seen since Desert Storm. Israel breathes easier. Gulf allies fall in line. China and Russia pause, watching the American eagle reassert dominance. But that's a big if. And history isn't kind to neat endings. Reward 2. Political redemption. If Trump pulls it off, minimal losses, clear objectives met, Iranian restraint or collapse, he reshapes his narrative. He's no longer just the chaos president, the impeached and indicted disruptor. He's a wartime commander-in-chief who crushed Tehran without a quagmire. Think Reagan in Grenada, Bush after September 11th, but with a Twitter megaphone and no filter. He'd ride that wave straight into re-election and beyond, rewriting the rules of foreign policy from Mar-a-Lago to the United Nations. And there's one more potential reward: alliance devotion. Israel, in its most desperate hour, would owe America a debt it could never repay. NATO's fractured trust could snap back together under American action. Even Gulf monarchies, who flirted with China, might double down on U.S. security guarantees if they see Washington still packs a punch. But let's be clear, these aren't wins in the old school, mission accomplished on an aircraft carrier sense. These are survival metrics, calculations of cost versus collapse, of burning currency for global credibility. And even then, every reward carries an invisible risk. Knock out Iran's nuclear sites, and you may only buy time. Rally the MAGA base today and risk alienating them tomorrow. Crush Tehran's proxies and spark a regional power vacuum that makes ISIS look like a rehearsal. That's the Matrix. It's ugly. It's brutal. It's real. And there's no box labeled easy. In the next section, we confront the heart of this thought experiment. Strip away the policy speak and pundit panels. What if Trump really does this? What if the order goes out and the gears of war grind into motion? That's not a future for the think tanks. That's a tomorrow with real blood, real fire, and a commander-in-chief rolling the dice with history. What if Trump gives the order? Not hypothetically, not in some closed-door war game, but in the real world, where F-35s scream into Iranian airspace, and the Pentagon confirms precision strikes within minutes of a presidential tweet that simply reads, "It has begun." This is our what-if moment, not a fantasy, not science fiction, but a plausible tomorrow wrapped in uncertainty and soaked in gasoline. Picture it. The American flag projected on Tehran's skyline through the lenses of infrared drones. A video address from Trump in front of gold curtains at Mar-a-Lago, declaring, "America does not retreat. We finish what others feared to start." Markets convulse. Iran retaliates. Hezbollah rains rockets across northern Israel. Yemen's Houthis strike U.S. naval ships in the Red Sea. Cyber attacks knock out sections of U.S. infrastructure, from Texas power grids to New York's financial systems. And back home, the American right splinters. MAGA loyalists chant USA at rallies, but libertarian holdouts warn of betrayal. The left accuses Trump of staging war to evade legal troubles. Cities brace for unrest. Wall Street sees its worst day since 2020. A new military draft bill gets floated. TikTok teens joke about fleeing to Canada, then realize it's not so funny anymore. What if the war that was supposed to be short and clean turns out long and dirty? Trump may begin with surgical strikes, but mission creep is a law of modern conflict. Just one downed U.S. pilot, one hostage video, one mass casualty strike on a U.S. embassy, and the pressure to escalate becomes volcanic. And what if Iran doesn't break? What if, instead, it adapts, decentralizes its nuclear program, weaponizes its proxies even harder, forges tighter military ties with China and Russia? The U.S. isn't just fighting Iran anymore. It's fighting a regional network backed by global adversaries. A slow-boiling World War III, fought in corridors and deserts instead of trenches. And what does this mean for Trump? On one hand, he could become the most powerful wartime president in decades. On the other, he risks obliterating the very doctrine that brought him to power, America first. Because if America bleeds in the sands of Persia once more, who will believe next time that staying out of foreign wars is even an option? This is the paradox. To look strong, Trump may need to act. But to stay true to his identity, he may need to resist. And history has never been kind to leaders caught between legacy and loyalty. So ask yourself, what if this war defines not just Trump's presidency, but America's soul? What if, years from now, we look back and realize that June 2025 wasn't just the month of escalation. It was the start of a new American century, one built not on victory, but on endless war. The horizon is darker than it's ever been. But we're not done yet. In our final segment, we'll pull back and ask, what comes next? Because this isn't just about missiles and votes. It's about identity. It's about destiny. And it's about what happens when a president makes the ultimate call, with the world watching and history sharpening its pen. The decision is made. Missiles have flown. Troops are mobilizing. And now, as dust swirls over the deserts of the Middle East and tweets flood timelines faster than facts, we face the final question. What does this mean for America, now and forever? This is not just another chapter in the saga of U.S. interventionism. This is a redefining pivot, a fork in the road that leads either toward dominance or disintegration. Let's take stock. On the international stage, the reaction is seismic. NATO is paralyzed. The European Union issues cautious condemnations by day and sends encrypted support signals by night. The Saudis are relieved and terrified. China uses the chaos to tighten its grip on Taiwan's periphery. Russia fans the flames, feeding arms to Iran's proxies like gasoline into an inferno, hoping to stretch U.S. bandwidth thin enough to snap. In global markets, oil prices top $200 a barrel. Inflation races beyond control. The dollar holds, for now, but cracks form in the foundation. BRICS nations accelerate their de-dollarization strategy, betting the empire is stumbling. And inside America, the war hits like a depth charge in the heart of an election season. Trump's base is on fire with support and confusion in equal measure. His critics on both sides scream hypocrisy. The man who promised no new wars just launched the biggest one since Iraq. Congress erupts. Emergency bills pass. The Supreme Court prepares for historic challenges on war powers and executive overreach. Military recruiters flood TikTok. Protesters flood the streets. Draft our billionaires trends on every platform. And still, the bombs fall. Every day, a new headline. U.S. forces strike Iranian radar sites. Iran launches cyber attack on U.S. water infrastructure. Missile hits U.S. carrier, dozens dead. Every day, another inch toward escalation, toward permanence, toward entrapment. This is how it happens. Not with mushroom clouds or doomsday speeches, but with slow erosion of policy, of principle, of the public's ability to distinguish defense from vengeance. This war, born in politics, now lives in perpetuity. And as the dust settles, for now, we must ask one final time. Was it worth it? Was deterrence restored? Is Iran truly weaker? Or has the cycle merely begun again? Did the U.S. reassert itself as a global force for stability? Or did it trade its credibility for chaos? Did Trump cement his image as a strongman, or fracture the coalition that brought him to power? And finally, did we, the people, ever have a say? This is the question at the core of What If Horizons. Not just what could happen, but what it means when it does. When speculation becomes policy. When nightmares become newscasts. So as we close today's episode, one truth remains. In geopolitics, every what if echoes far longer than the war itself. Next time on What If Horizons. What if Hezbollah invades northern Israel while Iran burns? It's a scenario more likely and more dangerous than you think. Until then, subscribe, share, and tell us. If the president launched a war in your name, would you still call it victory? Stay curious, stay cautious, and keep watching the horizon.